So, today we're going to look ahead at my Week 6 predictions for the NFL. So, let's just get right into it. So, first game, we got the Broncos, we got the Jets. I'm biased here. I'm a Broncos fan myself. But the Jets, we obviously know how bad they are. They're the worst team in the NFL. They're 0-5. Their run defense is terrible. Their pass defense is terrible. They basically can't do anything on offense. Unbiasedly, I'm going to say Broncos cover and win, obviously. And my favorite prop here would be J.K. Dobbins to score, probably. So, Dobbins, I believe, has 4 touchdowns in 5 games. He scored against Philly last week, and I don't see any reason why it won't continue against a worse team with the Jets. So then moving on, we got this a weird line. So the Pats and Saints. Okay. I mean, I've been, if, both sides for so long. The Saints are off a good win against the Giants last week. The Pats were off a really good win against the Bills last week. So it's hard for me not to want to say the Pats at 3.5 as well. So it's right, whatever. You get my point. It's right around 75% for the Pats spread right now, which is warranted given they're 3-2. They're coming off the Bills. I would expect them to cover. I would. Could the Saints make this an interesting game? Yeah, as the Saints have done all season, they've made the games interesting. They probably have the worst roster in the league, but they've been pretty respectable, honestly. I don't love any props here. I think Diggs is a good shout to get in. I don't, like Olave will be covered by Gonzo. Shaheed will be covered by the mix of Jones and Carlton Davis. And I just think that, hurts Rattler a lot. And the Pats' D-line has been really good, while the Saints, offensive line has struggled a lot to start this season. So, and again, here we are. We got Dallas -3 to Carolina. Now, here's my first upset pick. I like Carolina in this one. I do. I don't think Dallas. I mean, Dallas doesn't have a good defense. Dallas coming off a big win against the Jets. They played that game before that against Green Bay where, they tied 40-40, I believe. Carolina, they're coming off a good win against Miami. Obviously, they had that game against the Pats, but they were more respectable this season, in my opinion. And that's why I'm thinking the Panthers +3. Their pass defense been much better. The run defense been better too. And, Bryce Young, this is a good game for him to continue, building his success and continuing it like he did last week after he had a horrible first quarter. He had a terrible pick, he had a terrible fumble, and it's just another good game for him in this one. And if I'm going to pick any player, I know Rico Dowdle is starting in this one. I do think Javonte Williams scores in this game. Javonte, as a Broncos fan, like I said earlier, he was not very good last year, but this year he has looked incredible, and their offensive line is still healthy, so I have no problem taking Javonte to score here. We'll see what Dak does, really. And that'll decide, really, this game. The quarterback play, as always. Ooh, the Cardinals in Colts. The Cardinals just... I've never seen a collapse like that where Cam Ward played so bad and they still managed to win. He throws a pick and then, they pick it up for a fumble and they kick it around in the end zone, and yeah. Pretty incredible. The Cardinals' run defense is quite horrible. The Titans don't have a lot going for them, but their run game. And last week, Pollard was much better. And I see no reason for anything to change this week. I would say Colts -7.5. you know, it's a little over a touchdown, but just like Denver, it's a much better team, much better coach team. Kyler's playing hurt. That has to come into my opinion on this one. And, you know, besides that, like I said, the run defense is really bad for Arizona. I think Jonathan Taylor is a good bet to score a touchdown in this game too. Yeah. So now let's move on. We got another week of Cooper Rush. He's at last week against the Texans. He was pathetic. And the Rams were obviously coming off a bad loss against Mac Jones, and Kendrick Bourne. I would say the Rams -7. I think this is a better game. I know most of the people are going to be taking Devontae Adams, Puka, Kyren. My favorite in this one is Devontae. Honestly, 64.5 for him is a really low line against a team that is getting burnt. They got injuries to Wiggins. They have injuries to Marlon Humphrey. Jair looks like absolute shit. I think Devontae Adams over 65.5, or whatever line you get it as, is a really good bet. And if I'm going to pick anyone to score in this one, it would be Devontae. Plus 100. He's been a big red zone guy last week. He didn't do as well in the first half. I think they get him going early. So that would be my opinion on that one too. Chargers Dolphins. Yeah, this is another one where I'm back and forth the whole week. So we'll see what happens in this one. But right now, my pick, I'm gonna go with Miami. And Miami off a loss against Carolina, it's a dangerous pick. But I don't like the way the Chargers are playing. They just lost to the Giants and the Commanders. Now, their offensive line is missing Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater, which is their two All-Pro caliber tackles. Let's not forget. And now they're losing their first round running back in Hampton. So they're going with who already lost Najee Harris. They're going with Hassan Haskins and Kamani Vidal, two guys who barely have played in their career. So I'm gonna say Miami. I think this is a good chance for them to get an upset. I think 4.5 is a little too many points. Miami last week was up 17, I want to say, and they still lost. So I could be wrong here, but I don't like the way the Chargers look as a team. I don't know. They just absolutely collapsed since they played the Giants. Herbert looks worse. Yeah. So I mean, props wise, there's not really anything to love. A-Chain to score would be, my favorite, but and then even Waller, because Waller's been super. It's like, obviously Tyreek's out still for Miami. He's gonna be out all year, but Waddle was really good last week, and Waller was pretty good last week too. Now this is a weird one. So for divisional game, divisional games are always weird, and it's like, Pittsburgh is somehow a winning team once again, right? They're 3-1. They're coming off a bye week after they won against the Vikings in London, and the Browns lost in London. Now, the Browns defense is one of the best groups in football. Now, I'm going to say Browns +6. I would lean that way on this one. I do like the over because I don't think, I don't like Pittsburgh's defense has a lot of injuries going on right now. And I just think it's a good opportunity. And, as we know, watching football through the years, divisional games are weird ones. As we saw last week, or even this week with the Eagles losing to the Rams. Or the Eagles losing to the Giants. And the 49ers beating the Rams. These games are, Gabriel played last week. They were 30 seconds away from winning that game. So I think 6 points with how good their defense is, and Gabriel looking better than what they got out of Flacco, and they've been keeping games close all year. Green Bay they beat. Obviously the Lions they didn't play close. The Bengals with Burrow they only lost by one. They showed that's a game they deserve to win. So that would be I like +6. I like the over. These games are I'm sure most percentage is on the under. Even if they see +100, oh, it's free money, but why not? So now we're moving on. Seattle and Jacksonville. These are two really good teams. Jacksonville's 4-1, Seattle's 3-2. This is a tough one because Seattle's secondary is really bad. Strain's getting hurt's really bad for Jacksonville too. Right? I want to say Jacksonville so badly, and I've wanted to say it all week, and that would be the easy pick at even odds. Yeah. So it's Jacksonville's just they just these are two really good coach teams. Mike McDonald's in his second year. He was a defensive coordinator for the Ravens. Liam Cohen, he came in from the Bucks. He's as the offensive coordinator, and now he's the coach. And these are two teams that are thriving offensively. Lawrence and Darnold for years have been ridiculed. Darnold was so bad in New York. He was terrible in Carolina. Then he went to San Fran, and now Lawrence, has a coach that can, actually help him too. I mean, if I'm gonna pick anything, it would be the over here. These are two teams who, the Jags create a lot of turnovers, like we saw last week. They had that pick six against Mahomes, 99 yards. I don't know how many times I've seen that, but Seattle, they have their problems in the secondary. Woolen's out again. Witherspoon's been hurt. Their safeties look terrible. And Jacksonville, got carved up last week too. Of course, it's Mahomes, and you have to take that into account a little bit. But the way Darnold's playing, Darnold's played like PFF ranks him as the best quarterback. But let's be realistic. He's around top 7 to top 10 this year. He's not making as many mistakes. Week one he was bad, but besides that, he'd been really good. Like last week, they didn't lose that game because of him. They scored 35. He can't do more than that. Let's be real. Okay. I don't need to keep going on that one forever. That's a tough game that's for sure. Now, in this one, this is probably the hardest game of the week to call. Brock Bowers is out for Las Vegas again. I like Genty to score. I know it's -155. Do I think the Raiders win this? I would rather take Tennessee right now. I think Tennessee's looks like a better team to me right now on both sides of the ball. The Raiders' defense looks terrible. Geno looks terrible. Personally, I would say +4.5. My favorite play in that game would be Genty to score, but then we got this. So, Flacco's going to play this week, right? And Jaden Reed's still out for Green Bay. So, 14.5 is a big spread, right? The Bengals, covered last week. I do think it's too many points. I do. I don't. When you have, Ja'Marr Chase, I was waiting to see what happened with that, illness that he had on Friday. He missed practice. They said he's good to go to play Sunday. I don't think you can, discredit Ja'Marr Chase, Chase Brown in the receiving game. I just don't think Green Bay's defense is doing it for me right now. They were so hyped up 2 weeks in. They beat Detroit, and then they dropped the game to Cleveland. Then they tie against Dallas. Like, we can't. I can't allow that. The only like in the Commanders game they played, their defense was pretty good, but the Commanders were pretty pathetic too. So I personally would say the Bengals plus 14.5. TD wise, oh my God, he's minus 255. But I feel like I like Tucker Kraft to get in. He's Dobbs been a big red zone guy for Jordan Love, but Kraft has been the most targeted player on the team, especially without Reed and Watson still not back yet. So those would be my two go-tos there. See, this is a weird line too. San Fran's somehow San Fran is 4-1. Tampa Bay's also 4-1. San Fran, very good defense. Tampa Bay, very good offense. You know, it's the tales of two sides. I do like San Fran because I worry about the Bucs offense past Egbuka. Now Bucky's out, Mike Evans out, but now adding on to that, Chris Godwin's out, and Jalen McMillan's still not back from his neck injury. So you're trusting guys like Tez Johnson and you know Rashad White to do a lot of the work. Cade Otton too. But like Buka's not going to go for 300 yards. He's not Megatron. If he does, props to him. But the Niners are too good of a defensive unit under Robert Saleh, where I just don't think, I just can't see them dropping, 3.5. So too many points for me. If it was, near even, I would say the Bucs, because I do think the Bucs will win. But I just don't think they cover. I don't think, if they were fully healthy too, yeah, I'd give it to them. But like Mac Jones still starting, Christian McCaffrey, Tunja's been good. Bourne was really good last week, you know, and that defense still, pretty good too. Now this is a weird one. I know, everyone's gonna love the Lions. The Chiefs are 2-3. Oh my God, they're gonna fall off, right? It's Chiefs money line. As a Broncos fan, it pains me to say it, but under the lights, you really think Mahomes starting 2-4? Let's be realistic. You know, their defense is still very good. Uh, they still have Worthy. Who's playing in this one. Hollywood's been good. Kelsey. Their run game is the lacking part of the team, for sure. But, we saw, the Lions struggle in the secondary last week. Terrion Arnold, I know he's been, mediocre, but still losing a guy like that in your secondary who's arguably your best corner after Carlton Davis left in the offseason, it's not good. I would say the Chiefs money line. I'm not gonna push it and say 2.5 because the Lions are just such a good team. Where of course they could definitely cover and still lose. As for touchdowns, the top three guys are all Lions. Gibbs probably gets in, but I do think Worthy is a good one. Even Tyquan at plus 300 only is kind of crazy. And then the last two games of the week here. Monday Night Football. We got two games in this one. The first one, I'm going Buffalo minus 4.5. Now, Atlanta's off a bye, but Michael Penix is 1-4 in his career when a team scores over 7 points. Now, that is one of the worst stats I've ever heard in my life. I don't think they could stop Buffalo's offense, and I just don't think the Falcons are a good team. I think they're a pretty mediocre team still with Penix. You know, he just hasn't shown the flashes to me, and their play calling with the lack of Bijan sometimes just puts him in bad spots. You know, the Bills are coming off a bad loss against the Pats. They're going to bring it. And I bet Josh Allen, you know, scores himself. And James Cook also probably gets in. So I think Buffalo definitely covers that one. And then moving on, last game of the week, we got the number 1 and number 2 picks from 2024. You know, the Commanders are coming off a win. Bears off a bye. The Bears beat the Raiders a week before. I like Caleb way more than I like Daniels personally. I just don't. I think Daniels has, you know, been a little lackluster this year, and Terry's still out, you know. But Debo's been really good this year, you know, in the absence of Terry, especially the last couple of weeks. And the Bears are still missing Jalen Johnson. Their run defense is still terrible. Now, if I'm going to pick anything in this one, I want to say Chicago spread. That would be my lean in this one. I don't know if they cover, but I like the over because I think this is a good game for Krosky Merritt. As we go over here to the rushing yards. Now, last week he had 120 yards and a touchdown. His total is 69.5. The Bears are probably a bottom 3 run defense. You know, we saw 2 weeks ago where they played the Raiders, who were terrible the whole game. Geno threw 3 picks, but Genti ran for 120 yards, and that's terrible because the Raiders' offensive line is probably the worst in football, and you can see here, Krosky Merritt minus 145 to score. You know, it's a little telling. You know, the guy scored 2 touchdowns. He's a 7th round pick. Like, he was one of the last 10 picks this year. And now he's got the whole backfield to himself. You know, Chris Rodriguez, don't think he's going to play. McNichols, in the pass game, he's a little worrisome. And, you know, Daniels can, of course, rush the ball a little bit. But they want to keep him healthy after he was already hurt. They're going to go to Krosky Merritt early, and they're going to use him a lot. I think he could get like 15 carries, 100 yards again. And that's kind of why I don't want to take, or suggest a Bears spread. Like I said, I lean it because I think they're the better team, honestly. But I don't know if they cover in this one, especially the game being away. So, as for that is it. I hope Denver wins, like I said, and we'll see. We'll come back and see how I did in this one. So, thank you. Until next time, man.